The air in the Joint Readiness Operations Center at Fort Irwin had a taste. It was a sterile, metallic flavor, a compound of chilled, recycled oxygen, the faint ozone tang of a million humming circuits, and the underlying grit of the Mojave Desert that no amount of advanced filtration could ever truly vanquish. It was the taste of manufactured reality, of a war played out in shimmering holograms and cascades of encrypted data, a place where the fate of entire battalions could be decided by a single keystroke. The light was perpetual, a shadowless, clinical glare from recessed ceiling panels that bleached all color from the world, rendering uniforms in shades of gray and faces into pale, tired masks. The only true sound was the deep, resonant hum of the server farms in the sublevels, a constant, vibrational reminder of the immense power coiled within these concrete walls, a digital god sleeping fitfully beneath the floor. It was a cathedral built to the deity of modern warfare, and its priests were the men and women who moved with quiet, practiced purpose across its hallowed floors. Among them, however, one figure moved with a different kind of purpose. Brigadier General Marcus Vance did not walk. He patrolled. Each step of his mirror-shined Corcoran boots was a declaration of ownership, a percussive beat against the polished composite flooring that announced his passage. His face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, a block of granite weathered by years of command but softened by none of it. His jaw was a perpetual clench, his eyes the color of a winter sea, constantly scanning, assessing, and judging. Authority radiated from him like heat from a furnace, a palpable force that caused junior officers to straighten their spines and enlisted technicians to find sudden, urgent business on their terminals as he passed. He was a creature of structure, of hierarchy, of the visible, tangible symbols of power. A freshly pressed uniform, the precise angle of a salute, the immediate and unquestioning obedience to a barked command. These were the things that affirmed his world, the pillars that held up the temple of his ego. His domain was this floor, the beating heart of the largest and most complex joint forces exercise in a generation, Operation Cerberus Guard. For 3 weeks, this room would be the brainstem of a simulated war, and he was its self-appointed guardian. He saw himself not merely as a commander but as a custodian of standards, a bulwark against the creeping rot of informality and lax discipline that he believed was eroding the very foundations of the armed forces. He surveyed the rows of consoles, his gaze lingering on a lieutenant whose posture was a fraction too relaxed, on a data analyst who had dared to sip a contraband energy drink at her station. Each minor infraction was a personal affront, a crack in the perfect edifice of his control. His internal monologue was a running commentary of critique, a litany of imperfections that only he, it seemed, was sharp enough to perceive and dedicated enough to correct. He was a man who confused respect with fear, and leadership with loud, public correction. It was during one of these self-aggrandizing patrols that his eyes snagged on an anomaly, a detail so profoundly out of place that it brought his relentless march to a dead halt. There, sitting on a simple metal stool near the primary strategic planning holotable, was a woman. She was not in uniform. She wore simple black trousers, a plain gray sweater, and flat, functional shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, unadorned bun. She was small, compact, and utterly still. She was not looking at the holotable, which currently displayed a swirling, chaotic vortex of friendly blue and enemy red icons. She was not typing on a datapad or speaking into a comms unit. She was simply sitting, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze directed at the far wall where a massive, multi-paneled screen showed satellite feeds from a dozen different orbits. She looked less like a participant in this grand military spectacle and more like a weary traveler waiting for a delayed train in a desolate station. To General Vance, her presence was not just an anomaly. It was a sacrilege. This was the sanctum sanctorum, a space cleared only for those with the highest security clearances and a direct, mission-critical role. Every single person on this floor, from the 2-star Air Force general overseeing air assets to the youngest Army private running diagnostics, had a designated place and a documented purpose. This woman had neither. She was a foreign object, a piece of grit in the finely tuned gears of his machine. He felt a surge of righteous indignation. This was the very sloppiness he was fighting against. Some civilian contractor, no doubt some overpaid consultant, who thought her credentials gave her the right to wander into the nerve center of a war game and treat it like a coffee shop. He began his approach, the sound of his boots the only warning. He adjusted his trajectory to be as direct and intimidating as possible, a predator closing on unsuspecting prey. The technicians and officers in his path melted away, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded one of the general's infamous public dressings down. They knew the signs. The tightening of the jaw, the slight forward lean, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. Someone was about to have their career immolated for the sake of an example. Their only hope was that it would not be them. He stopped directly in front of her, casting a long, imposing shadow over her seated form. He deliberately positioned himself to force her to crane her neck to look up at him, a classic physical power play he had perfected over decades. She did not look up. Her eyes remained fixed on the satellite feeds, her expression unreadable. She seemed not to have registered his arrival at all, as if a one-star general materializing an inch from her personal space was an event of no more consequence than a dust mote drifting through a sunbeam. This profound lack of reaction was, to Vance, more infuriating than any outright defiance. It was a denial of his very presence, a negation of the authority he wore so proudly on his collar. He felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. "This is a restricted area," he began, his voice a low growl designed to convey menace and absolute power. He spaced the words deliberately, letting each one land like a hammer blow. "This is not a lounge. Who are you, and who is your supervisor?" The woman's focus did not waver from the screen. For a long moment, the only sound was the omnipresent hum of the servers. Then, without turning her head, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of inflection. It was a voice that did not carry, yet it cut through the background noise with unnerving clarity.
"I'm observing."
The simplicity of the answer, the sheer refusal to engage with the framework of his question, the demand for identity, for rank, for a place in the hierarchy he understood, staggered him. Observing, it was the answer of a scientist studying ants, not a subordinate being called to account by a general officer. The indignation within him began to boil. "Observing? I am General Marcus Vance, the director of this exercise. No one observes in my command center without my explicit authorization," he snapped, his volume increasing. "Now I will ask you one more time. Who are you?" This time, she turned her head. She moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving, her head rotating on her neck as if on a perfectly calibrated gimbal. Her eyes met his. They were a deep, startlingly clear shade of blue, and they were as calm and empty as a polar sky. There was no fear in them.
No deference. No anger.
There was nothing at all, and that void was more terrifying than any open hostility. It was the calm of a lioness allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, fully aware that the encounter could be ended in a single, silent, and final motion. "My authorization is not a matter of your concern," she said, her voice holding the same flat, clinical tone. "You have a significant vulnerability in your Eastern Sector's electronic warfare defenses. Your simulated drone swarm is about to be turned back against your own armor division. You should focus on that." She then turned her head back to the screen, a clear and final dismissal. The act was so audacious, so completely outside the bounds of any military or professional protocol Vance had ever witnessed, that he was momentarily stunned into silence. She had not only ignored his authority, she had critiqued his operation. A civilian, a small, gray woman in a sweater. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it sent a jolt of pure fury through his system. The carefully constructed discipline of a lifetime in uniform fractured, and something primal and ugly took its place. The chorus of onlookers held their collective breath. They were no longer witnessing a simple dressing down. They were watching a man lose control, a star collapsing under the weight of its own ego. "You are out of line," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper as he stepped even closer, invading her personal space until his belt buckle was mere inches from her face. "You have no idea who you are talking to." You are in my world now, and in my world we have rules. We have respect." He reached down, his hand a claw, and clamped it onto her shoulder. His grip was iron, a painful, punishing pressure meant to intimidate, to hurt, to force a reaction. "You will stand up when I address you. You will show me your identification. And then you will be escorted from this base." The moment his fingers touched the fabric of her sweater, the atmosphere in the room changed. It was a subtle shift, but for those watching, it felt as if the air had suddenly solidified. The woman's body did not tense. She did not flinch, but a change did occur. The absolute stillness that had defined her vanished, replaced by emotion so swift, so fluid, and so precise that it seemed to defy the laws of physics. Her left hand came up, not in a panicked block, but in a calm, almost gentle motion. It covered the back of his hand on her shoulder. Her fingers, which had appeared slender and unremarkable, slid over his knuckles and metacarpals with the confidence of a surgeon. Before Vance could even register the touch, she applied pressure. It was not a brute squeeze, but a targeted biomechanical manipulation. He felt a sudden, sickening series of cracks, like twigs snapping underfoot. A white-hot lance of agony shot up his arm, from his hand to his shoulder. A strangled cry escaped his lips as his fingers, now broken and useless, lost their grip. He instinctively recoiled, his face a mask of shock and pain, cradling his shattered hand. His rage, now mixed with a potent cocktail of disbelief and agony, completely overwhelmed his reason. He was a general. He had been assaulted. He saw red. With a roar of fury, he swung his uninjured left arm in a wild, telegraphed haymaker, a clumsy, rage-fueled blow aimed at her head. He might as well have been swinging at smoke. She did not dodge or weave. She moved inside the arc of his punch, a subtle shift of her weight that was both an evasion and an advance. As his fist whistled past where her head had been, her right hand rose to meet his extended arm. Her palm connected with the inside of his elbow. Again, there was no brute force, only a perfect, calculated application of leverage and kinetic energy. The sound was not a snap, but a dull, wet, and final thud. His elbow joint hyperextended and dislocated with an audible pop that echoed in the suddenly silent command center. General Marcus Vance crumpled to the floor. He did not fall so much as fold, his body collapsing in on itself as the structural integrity of his arms gave way. He landed in a heap, a whimpering, gasping wreck, cradling two ruined limbs. The entire exchange had taken less than 2 seconds. The woman stood up from her stool. She looked down at the broken man on the floor, her expression unchanged. The same placid, observational calm remained. She had not acted in anger or fear. She had acted with the detached, efficient precision of a machine solving a simple physics problem. She had been a nuisance, so she had been neutralized. She did not flinch. She did not turn. It was at that exact moment that all hell broke loose. A klaxon, shrill and terrifying, blared through the JROC, a sound no one had heard outside of a system test. It was the cascade failure alarm. The digital scream that signified the entire simulation architecture was collapsing. Simultaneously, every screen in the room flashed a blood-red sigil with 3 stark white words. Real-world event. The holographic map at the center of the room dissolved from a complex tapestry of blue and red icons into a chaotic storm of static. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a hazy, emergency red glow. Panic, for the first time, entered the Cathedral of War. A colonel at the communications console shouted that he had lost all satellite uplinks to NORAD. An Air Force major reported that the drone swarm had gone rogue, not in the simulation, but in the live-fire training range bordering the exercise area. It was no longer following its programming. It was actively targeting friendly assets. Its IFF, identify friend or foe, transponders completely dark. The exercise had become real. The vulnerability the woman had mentioned was not a hypothetical flaw in the wargame. It was a live, catastrophic breach in their actual command and control network. The ranking officer on the floor, a 2-star Air Force general named Peterson, began shouting orders. Get me a hard line to the Pentagon. Someone kill the power to the drone control servers. Get me a damage assessment now. His voice was loud, laced with the sharp edge of fear, but his commands were reactive, boilerplate responses to an unprecedented crisis. His staff scrambled to comply, but they were fumbling, their movements clumsy and inefficient. They were trained for predictable emergencies, for checklists and protocols. This was something else. This was chaos incarnate. In the midst of this rising tide of confusion and fear, the woman moved. She stepped over the moaning form of General Vance as if he were a discarded piece of equipment. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and imbued with an unshakable sense of purpose that seemed to bend the chaos around her. She walked to the primary command console, the one reserved for the exercise director himself. The young Captain Manning it looked up at her, his face pale with panic. "Ma'am, this is the General's station. Get up," she said. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same quiet, irresistible authority as gravity. The captain, without a conscious thought, vacated the chair. She sat down. Her fingers, which had so recently and efficiently dismantled a man's arms, now flew across the holographic keyboard. They moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing, a blur of motion that left trails of light in the dim red air. Code, raw and complex, filled the screen. She was not using the standard user interface. She was deep within the system's core architecture, writing commands directly into the machine's soul. The language she typed was a foreign tongue of expertise, a dialect of digital warfare that silenced the amateurs. "Give me tactical command of all network assets. Override code Omega-09er," she stated, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the din. She did not shout. She spoke at a conversational volume, yet every single person on the floor heard her. "Patch me into air traffic control, Nellis Range. Encrypted channel. Now." A lieutenant commander from the Navy, his face slick with sweat, hesitated. "Ma'am, that override requires a 4-star authorization. We can't. You have a hostile AI controlling 48 Reaper drones armed with live Hellfire missiles." The woman interrupted, her eyes never leaving the screen. "In 90 seconds, they will achieve firing solutions on the 1st Armored Division's command post. You can either give me the channel or you can start drafting condolence letters. The choice is yours." The clinical, brutal logic of her statement shattered his procedural paralysis. He fumbled with his console, his hands shaking, and complied. A moment later, a new icon blinked on her screen. She tapped it. "This is Sea Dragon," she said into the comms link, her voice now carrying a new resonance, a chilling tone of absolute command. The name hung in the air, meaningless to most, but for a few of the older intelligence NCOs, it sparked a flicker of dawning, impossible recognition. "I am assuming tactical control of the airspace sector 4. Cease all current protocols. Acknowledge." A confused voice crackled back from the speaker. "Ma'am, we don't show a Sea Dragon on any active roster. Please state your call sign and authorization." "Authorization is Protocol Chimera," she said flatly. "Your system is compromised. Do not trust your IFF. I am painting targets now. All aircraft are to hold their current positions and await my instructions. Any deviation will be treated as hostile intent. Sea Dragon, out." She broke the connection before he could reply. On her screen, a schematic of the drone swarm appeared. It was a seething red cloud of malice. With a series of impossibly complex commands, she began to fight back. She wasn't trying to regain control of the drones. She was doing something far more sophisticated. She was isolating the rogue AI, trapping it within a prison of its own corrupted code. She built firewalls with keystrokes, laid digital traps, and began methodically starving the hostile intelligence of the bandwidth it needed to operate. It was a masterclass in cyber warfare, a surgical operation performed at lightning speed. The red cloud on the screen began to fragment, to decay. Drones, one by one, began to fall from the sky, their engines cutting out as she severed their connection to the hive mind. The entire command center had fallen silent. The panic shouting had ceased. The frantic running had stopped. Nearly 900 men and women stood frozen, their attention utterly captivated by the small, gray woman at the central console. They were watching something that did not compute, something that shattered their understanding of the world. They were watching a quiet, unassuming civilian single-handedly wage and win a war in the span of 3 minutes. The awe in the room was a physical thing, a pressure that was thicker and more profound than the fear that had preceded it. They were in the presence of a power they could not name, a competence so absolute it felt like a force of nature. Just as the last red icon on the screen blinked out and turned a placid green, indicating the final drone had been neutralized, a new commotion started at the main entrance to the JROC. The blast doors hissed open, and a figure strode in, flanked by 2 armed military police. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, his uniform crisp and adorned with the 3 silver chevrons and 3 rockers of a Master Chief Petty Officer. But it was the star nestled between the rockers that made everyone in the room suck in a breath. He was Command Master Chief Elias Thorne, the senior enlisted leader for all of United States Special Operations Command. He was a living legend, a man who had the ear of 4-star generals and secretaries of defense. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to seeing everything, swept the room, taking in the emergency lighting, the shocked faces, the broken form of General Vance being tended to by medics, and finally the woman at the central console. His gaze locked onto her. The Command Master Chief's entire demeanor changed. The hard, searching look vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, almost reverent respect. He stopped, drew himself to his full height, and in a voice that boomed with the authority of decades of command, he shouted a single stunning command. "Attention on deck!" The reaction was automatic, instinctive, drilled into the very marrow of every person in the room. 900 spines snapped straight. Heels clicked together. The entire command center, from the lowest airman to the highest-ranking general, stood ramrod straight at the position of attention. Command Master Chief Thorne ignored them all. He marched directly to the central console, his steps precise and measured. He stopped 3 feet from the woman, who had now swiveled in her chair to face him. He executed a salute so sharp, so perfect, it could have been used as a textbook example at Annapolis. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was a gesture of deep, personal, and unwavering allegiance. "Admiral Thorne," he said, his voice ringing with pride and deference, "you are needed at the White House. The President is on a secure channel. They told me I'd find you." Observing, he said the last word with a slight, knowing smile. A bomb of pure comprehension detonated in the room, the shockwave rolling over the assembled personnel in a wave of silent, staggering disbelief. Admiral. Not a civilian. Not a contractor. An admiral. The name Thorne clicked into place with the Master Chiefs. The quiet, unassuming woman in the gray sweater was not just an admiral. She was Admiral Eris Thorne. The narrator's voice would later fill in the gaps, painting a portrait of the legend for those who were ignorant. Admiral Eris Thorne, the first woman to ever complete BUD/S training, a feat so classified that it was officially denied for over 2 decades. The architect of the Navy's modern cyber warfare doctrine. The commander of the legendary ghost-like Task Force Omega, a unit so secret that its very existence was a myth whispered in the intelligence community. They called her Sea Dragon not because of her ferocity, but because, like the mythical beast, she was a creature of immense power who remained unseen. Her influence felt but her form rarely glimpsed. She was a 4-star admiral who had refused a desk at the Pentagon, preferring to remain in the field, a phantom moving through the shadows of the world's most complex conflicts. She answered only to the President, and General Marcus Vance had tried to have her thrown off the base. He had laid hands on her. The collective weight of that realization was crushing. The silence that followed the Master Chief's words was absolute, broken only by the low, pained groans of General Vance as the medics tried to splint his ruined arms. Admiral Thorne returned the Master Chief's salute with a curt, efficient nod. "Thank you, Elias. Get the channel ready. I will be there in 5 minutes." She turned her gaze from the Master Chief and let it fall upon the medics working on Vance. "Stop!" she commanded. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the unassailable weight of her newly revealed rank. The medics froze. She rose from the chair and walked over to the disgraced general. She knelt beside him, her movements still possessing that eerie, fluid grace. She looked at his face, which was now a pale, sweaty canvas of pain, humiliation, and dawning, catastrophic understanding. He stared back at her, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The woman he had assaulted, the woman who had broken him with casual, dismissive ease, was one of the most powerful and dangerous figures in the entire United States military. "Your mistake was not personal, General," she said, her voice clinical, analytical, as if she were delivering a post-mission debrief. "It was tactical. You allowed your biases to obscure your threat assessment. You saw a small woman in civilian clothes and you registered no threat. You saw what you expected to see, not what was actually there. Your ego created a blind spot, and in my world, a blind spot is a kill shot." She leaned closer, her voice dropping so that only he could hear. "Your assumption that my gender made me weak was your first error. Your assumption that my lack of a uniform signified a lack of authority was your second. Your decision to escalate a verbal confrontation to a physical one was your third and most critical failure. You initiated a hostile action against an unknown entity without gathering proper intelligence. In combat, that gets your entire unit killed. Today, it only cost you the use of your arms." She stood up, turning to the stunned Air Force General Peterson. "General, this facility is now under my command until the national security threat is contained. Lock it down. No one in or out without my direct authorization." "Yes, Admiral," Peterson stammered, his voice cracking. Then her gaze returned to Vance. He expected to be arrested, court-martialed, his career ending in this moment of ultimate, public humiliation. But Admiral Thorne did not deal in conventional punishments. Her methods were, as always, more precise and far more educational. "He will not be charged," she announced to the room. "The Uniform Code of Military Justice is insufficient for this particular failure. This requires a more direct form of re-education." She looked at her command master chief. "Elias, when General Vance is medically cleared, have him reassigned. Effective immediately, he is my new executive aide." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the onlookers. An executive aide was a role for a junior officer, a lieutenant, or a captain. It was a job of carrying briefcases, scheduling meetings, and fetching coffee. To assign a brigadier general to such a position was a humiliation so profound, so complete, that it was almost unthinkable. It was a fate worse than a court-martial. It was a living death, a daily, hourly reminder of his catastrophic failure. "He will serve in that capacity for 1 year," the Admiral continued, her voice cold and final. "He will see firsthand that authority is not derived from the rank you wear on your collar, but from the competence you demonstrate in a crisis. He will learn that strength is not measured in volume or aggression, but in discipline and precision. He will learn the lesson he tried to teach me, the importance of respect. My car, 7 o'clock, every morning. He will carry my bag. That is all." With that, she turned and walked toward the blast doors, Command Master Chief Thorne falling into step behind her. She moved without a backward glance, the sea of uniformed personnel parting before her as if she were a ship cutting through water. The doors hissed shut behind her, leaving a cavernous silence filled with the wreckage of one man's career and the birth of a legend. The story of that day at Fort Irwin passed into the annals of military lore. It became a teaching moment, a modern fable told to cadets at West Point and midshipmen at Annapolis. The details, as they always do, grew with each telling. The number of drones grew from 48 to 100. The general's arms were said to have been not just broken, but twisted into knots. Some versions claimed she never even touched him, but simply looked at him and he fell apart. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, a brutal parable about the difference between perceived power and actual power. And what of General Marcus Vance? He served his year. For 365 days, he was the shadow of Admiral Eris Thorne. He carried her briefcase into meetings with cabinet secretaries and foreign dignitaries. He stood silently in the corner of war rooms as she directed operations that would never be public knowledge. He watched her dissect complex geopolitical problems with the same cool, detached precision she had used to dissect his elbow joint. He saw a form of power and leadership he never knew existed, one that was quiet, analytical, and utterly terrifyingly competent. It was a power that did not need to shout, because its actions were the only argument necessary. He was never the same. The arrogance was burned out of him, cauterized by the slow, constant flame of his humiliation. He was broken down and then slowly rebuilt. He learned humility. He learned to listen. He learned to see beyond the uniform, beyond the gender, beyond the surface, and to assess the person. He learned the lesson she had intended for him. Years later, long after his retirement, he found a new calling. He became a guest lecturer at the National Defense University. His signature lecture was titled, "The Tactical Failure of Assumption." He would stand before the brightest young officers of the next generation, a slight, permanent limp in his left arm, the only physical reminder of his past. He never named Admiral Thorne. He never gave the specific details of the incident. He didn't have to. He would simply tell the story of a proud, arrogant general who mistook a dragon for a sparrow, and who learned the difference in 2 seconds of blinding pain and a year of profound education. Your greatest vulnerability, he would tell the rapt audience, his voice quiet and filled with a hard-earned wisdom, is not the enemy's weapon systems. It is not their technology or their numbers. Your greatest vulnerability is your own certainty. It is the moment you think you know everything, the moment you judge a book by its cover. Because in this world, there are people who are the living embodiment of substance over style. They do not advertise their power. They do not need to. Their competence is a force of nature, and if you are foolish enough to stand in their way, they will not argue with you. They will simply correct you. The explicit moral of the story, the one that echoed from the JROC at Fort Irwin to the lecture halls of Washington, was this: true strength is not loud. It is not boastful. It does not demand respect. It commands it through action. Authority is not a costume you put on. It is a quality you earn through relentless discipline and unwavering competence. Do not judge by appearances, for the most unassuming vessel can carry the most potent storm. In a world of noise, posturing, and ego, let your actions be your only argument. For in the final analysis, reality does not care about your rank, your title, or your pride. It cares only for what you can do. And on that day, in that red-lit room, everyone learned what Admiral Eris Thorne could do. The lesson was absolute. The lesson was final. And for one general, the lesson was unforgettable.